Call to order the Gladstone Planning Commission for Tuesday, 15 August 2017. Call the roll.
Commissioner Natalie Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Malachi.
Here.
Commissioner Poole.
Here.
Commissioner Wentz.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Smith.
Here.
Chair Rowlett.
Here. So tonight, let's salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight we're doing a joint work session with City Council, and we'll do that now. And when we're done with that, then we'll go back to the consent agenda and start there. Is that good?
That's perfect. Jim, you going to introduce Matt? Okay.
Good evening, Council and Planning Commission members. Tonight we're going to talk about our TSP. We're going to do a presentation that Matt Bell with Kittleson and Associates. We've been working on this for, I don't know, a good year and a half probably. So I don't want to steal his thunder of all the stuff he's going to talk about, the history and everything. But anyways, Matt Bell with Kittleson Associates to give the presentation.
Hello, everybody. Again, Matt Bell with Kittleson. And there's quite a few people that have been involved in this process along the way, and I'll just kind of dive in here a little bit. So in addition to, obviously we're working with a lot of different folks from the city, a lot of different departments from the city have been part of this process. We've also been working with Angelo Planning Group, and I got CJ over here. He'll get up here in a couple seconds and do that. We've had a couple of advisory committees, both a technical advisory committee and a citizen advisory committee. We met with the traffic safety committee. We've also met with you folks a couple of times. And here coming up pretty quick, we will go into the hearing process. And as we get through that process, both in September and October, we'll be going towards the adoption of the TSP. So you see, as Jim mentioned, we kicked this off originally back in August of 2016. We spent a little bit of time talking about just general goals and objectives, both for the TSP update as well as for the TSP itself. And then I'll just highlight that this project, the way that this is laid out is very similar to how the TSP is laid out as well. So the TSP also includes a description of those goals and objectives, both for the TSP as well as for the ongoing upgrade or maintenance of the system. We then look at needs and deficiencies. We move from that into solutions, where we develop a series of solutions in order to address those needs and deficiencies. We then go and develop a draft plan and a financially constrained plan. And so, as we note in the TSP, and as we'll note later on, really the fundamental difference between those is the plan itself is the full list of what it would take to bring the system up to meet essentially a lot of your own standards today, as well as to add a lot of bells and whistles that you may not have had for the last several years. The financially constrained plan is the plan that we anticipate you being able to fund over the next 20-year period, given the projected funding for that time period. So then we move into the draft TSP, which is where we are today, and the implementation language, which is what CJ is going to talk about. And then again, into adoption. So this is, as I mentioned, this process is largely, it has a large public component to it, and so we do have a series of meetings. All the TACs, the Technical Advisory Committee, the PACs, the Policy Advisory Committee. You see, we met with those committees 3 to 4 times throughout the course of the project. Again, we had some community meetings, virtual community meetings, and the work sessions with you folks. Actually, I should have added a check mark to that box for today. It's really guided by a series of tech memos. Each one of these tech memos will be included as a technical appendix to the TSP, so they will be available. And one of the things I want to talk about as we get into the TSP itself is how the world of technical appendices has sort of evolved over the last few years. A lot of TSPs, when I first started doing TSPs 10 years ago, they took every one of these and they crammed it into a large 250 some odd page document. Not unlike the TSP that you guys have today. The TSPs of today are much slimmer. They're much more focused on the plan itself, and so a lot of it is largely based on what comes out of Tech Memo 9, with a little bit of what's in Tech Memos 6, 7, and 8, and 9 are all kind of, rather than including a lot of the background information, we just tend to refer people to the technical appendix. So I'll talk about that more here in a second. So again, the draft TSP really consists of a plan and the planned transportation system, which is the projects needed to address all deficiencies in the system. A financially constrained system, which is the projects that are likely to be funded over the, actually this should be 23-year period, because our horizon is 2040. Apologize for that. And then a lot of these are, again, they're developed based on the goals and objectives of the TSP update. So what essentially we did was we took all of those solutions, we ran them through a series of filters, whether or not they're feasible, whether or not they're cost effective, whether they provide a lot of benefit, and then we ran them through the goals and objectives and evaluation criteria to make sure that they were in line with what we set out to do when we first started the TSP process. We developed the planning level cost estimates, so when you see all these tables, they all have cost estimates. Those are, I'll say they're planning level, but they do have a lot of detail behind them, and I think some folks have asked what that detail is, so that should be included in the appendix of some of the tech memos. It's the only thing it doesn't include is right-of-way, which, as we know, can be a really large expense. And so one of the reasons why we do that is because we don't anticipate a lot of these projects really going forward until there's dedications occurring or when it's a really large capital improvement that's going through. So the right-of-way costs tend to not be included in what we call planning level cost estimates. Finally, we look at transportation funding. Again, as we talked really early on in the process, we were looking at what the city was likely going to have over that 23-year period. And what we ultimately settled on in the last several months was you had about $3.75 million to address the needs over time. Now that is sort of the base, that's the base case based on your current budget, based on your current projections for that time period. It doesn't account for any grants that you guys are receiving over time, and we know that there are a few projects that are in this list that are really very grant fundable. Some of the bigger projects we've looked at and we've considered for grants are the like the trolley trail bridge, for example, is going to be a really large, it's going to have a really large cost, but it's also going to be a really nice high-profile project that would likely come with a lot of grant funding. So there's other examples like that throughout the TSP. So the TSP itself is organized in much this fashion. So we start with our really high-level projects, and these are the transportation system management and operations. And I've talked to you guys about these a little bit before, but these are essentially ways of making the system more efficient. They're low-hanging fruit. They're low cost. They're a lot of them are really technology-based types of programs and policies and different things that you can do to try to increase the efficiency of the system. We then move into land use, and really the land use is fairly limited for the city of Gladstone, mostly because you guys are largely built out, but also because you do have a lot of really good land use, a lot of differentiation between your land uses and the way that they're organized within the streets and the city is pretty good. I think the couple of projects we have in there are for adding some neighborhood commercial if appropriate. Other things like access management, these are, again, ways to sort of improve the efficiency, but also the safety of the transportation system. These are, again, it's more of a programmatic-based improvement for the system because, again, you're largely built out. A lot of your streets already have access points. There's not a lot of undeveloped land throughout the area. So it's really about developing a program that can be implemented over time as redevelopment occurs and as new houses and new developments are coming in place. There's a handful of safety improvements, ped, bike, transit, motor vehicle improvements, and you know, I want to save as much time as I can at the end to answer all your questions. So just kind of jump in a little bit. In terms of funding, what we had come up with over that time period again is you know, we have a fair amount. We have about $3.75 million over that 23-year period. And the way that we anticipate it coming up is you've got about $750,000 every 5 years or so, and then a larger chunk for that last 15 years, or it should be 13 years. Apologize for that. But then the way that it shakes out is you come up a little bit short here and a little bit short there, but really the implementation and the funding of these projects is largely based on when the funding becomes available, how that fits into your capital improvement plan, and how ultimately you guys want to fund the project. So this is our best guess at these priorities and at the way that it kind of lays out over the 23-year period. We largely look to you folks as well as our committees in the city to help identify where we've taken the first crack at identifying what the high priority projects are, and we ran that through the public, we ran that through the committees. We have that. That's what's presented in front of you today. But we're at a workshop, so I want to just let you know that is still fair game. That everything in the TSP at this point is still fair game, and it will be until obviously we get to adoption. Wow. Do you want to advance me one?
Click back on the one thing, because if you click on something, it'll shut him off. There you go.
There we go. Actually, with that, I'm going to turn it over to CJ and let CJ talk to you a little bit about the amendments.
I know when I was messing with it.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is CJ Doxey. I'm with Angelo Planning Group. We're helping Kittleson with the implementation of the TSP, as I'm sure you're very familiar with at this point. In an earlier work session, I believe my colleague Darcy Rudzinski has come before you and kind of giving you a highlight overview of some of the things that we are recommending for changes to the development code. I'm just going to probably go over those same things again. It may not be anything new to you folks who were there at the previous meeting. And with the draft TSP provides a bunch of projects. It also includes a lot of standards and guidelines that ultimately trickle down into the development code. So a lot of the work that we have done in terms of going through your development code is to make sure that the dots are being connected between the TSP, between the comprehensive plan, and in addition to statewide planning goals, state planning documents, Metro RTFP, and we just want to make sure that in a bureaucratic sense all those boxes are checked so this TSP can be adopted as smoothly as possible. Let's see if I get this. All right. So the regulatory solutions are amendments to Title 17 of the Gladstone Municipal Code. No big surprise, these are all on transportation topics that as new land gets developed and new development is proposed, they're subject to standards, and oftentimes they'll be subject to parking standards, street standards, on-site pedestrian circulation standards, and some of those things. And so what we did is we looked at your development code and we looked at the TSP and we said, well, what is new in the TSP that needs to move into the development code as part of this? And this gives you a highlight of some of those areas that we're recommending be updated. Street and road standards, it's kind of a housekeeping item. Same thing with vehicular and pedestrian circulation, block sizes. Those are things that for the most part are pretty minimal. Off-street parking standards and off-street loading standards are, despite what they look, also very minimal. We're not proposing anything groundbreaking there. Bicycle parking has a lot of text to it. We're recommending a lot of clarifications in terms of differentiating long-term versus short-term bicycle parking and seeing how that will fit in terms of promoting alternative uses. And then in terms of code and comprehensive plan amendments, we're just adding some clarifications in terms of anytime we go through a process like this, it specifically says, hey, if you're going to do a zone change or an amendment, we want to make sure that the transportation planning rule anything is consistent with the transportation planning rule. And all this is to say that these are just tightening up. We're not really revolutionizing anything with the Gladstone Municipal Code. We don't expect anything fundamentally to change with how it's administered. Overall, these are housekeeping items, but obviously these are all up for discussion as part of today's work session. With that, I'll hand it back to Matt.
And I'll just add in there real quick because I know it's a sensitive subject, but just taking a step back to the parking changes, we're not proposing any reductions to the minimums in off-street parking citywide. So that's just want to make sure that's clarified right up front.
I can elaborate on that more too, if you like.
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, since it's come up, everyone's favorite topic, right? As part of the amendments as far as the TSP, parking standards in terms of what the minimum requirements are, we're not proposing any changes to that as part of the TSP update. What the actual recommendations we are doing is, in a sense, making it a little more restrictive. The language, there's currently provisions in there that say you can count on-street parking towards your minimum requirements. What we're recommending is saying, well, you can't count it a couple blocks away. You can only count it right in front of your property. Also things like you can also have a parking lot within 500 feet that serves the minimum requirement. So make it a little bit easier for new development to meet that minimum requirement without having to do it within that same lot or parcel, in particular because downtown area and a lot of the commercial areas are small in general. Minimum parkings can be a little prohibitive or challenging in terms of meeting that minimum requirement while still having an adequate sized building for those services. And then also can you go back 2 slides? Off-street loading requirements. So one of the things that we're recommending for changes right there is an exception that's targeted for storefront businesses in the area. So currently there are off-street loading requirements where you need bays for typical trucks, and oftentimes those loading bays on the property make it extremely difficult for businesses to make improvements because that'll get triggered and they'll have to put in, as it's written right now, they'll have to put in a new loading bay. So what we've recommended is saying that under certain circumstances you can do it on the street, and those circumstances are no more than 3 times per day during 5 and 12, or anytime you want between 12 and 5 in the morning. So that's kind of to highlight some of the parking standards, and obviously I'm happy to answer any questions on that now or after we wrap up the presentation.
And that largely actually takes us to the end of our presentation. So really we just, again, we have a hearing with the Planning Commission in September, and then the hearing with the City Council will be in October. We will have a fair amount of work to do between now and then, obviously address any changes you guys have for us in the TSP. Also to get a lot of, beyond just the code amendments, a lot of the implementation language, and make, again, a lot of that tying everything all together sort of happens over the next month or so before we come back to you for the hearing. So with that, I want to, again, just open it up to talk as much as we can about what's in the TSP and answer as many of your questions as you have. I just want to bring up this slide so you can kind of see the general outline. And if you don't have any questions for me, I'll poke at you with a few questions that I have of my own that you guys might be interested in. All right, good.
Perhaps you covered this, but in the draft transportation system plan, there's a total of $17,625,000, and it's staggered over a period of time. And I wondered if those are 2017 dollars or if they're indexed for the period that they're going to be spent.
They are $2017. That's, yeah, they're $2017.
And Matt, could you talk about CADs versus population? Because what I see here, the 2010 numbers are 50% higher than the actual population and census. The land use. H5.
No.
That's
good. This should be Roman numerals. All right.
So under land use, you have a table 1, and it says population was 16,000 in 2010. The census says there was actually only 11,491.
Okay.
So this CAD is actually showing us a 50% higher population than we actually have.
All right.
And the growth from 1990 to 2010, 20 years, is only 1,000. So I just want to make sure that we're basing our decisions on actual numbers that are realistic. These numbers being 50% higher concerns me.
Okay. Great question first off, and just to, I don't know if I'll be able to appease all your concerns, but I'll take a shot at that. So these numbers, just so you know where they came from, a TAZ is a Transportation Analysis Zone. It's something that Metro uses as a basis for their modeling. A TAZ is essentially a geographic area that includes a certain amount of population and a certain amount of employment, and they have projections for how much of that is going to grow within that TAZ. And so each one of those is, there's multiple TAZs, as you can see from some of those maps. There's multiple TAZs in the city, and I think maps 2 and 3 show where those are located at. And so essentially what they have for the city as overall is that the existing population, and so it actually does overlap just a little bit with the boundary outside of the city. So a better representation of this would be, this is actually the numbers for those TAZs. So as you see in maps 2 and 3, there is a little bit of overlap with the city boundary and the areas surrounding the city.
But that little bit is
Right. It is a big overlap, and so recognizing that, there is also the projections themselves. They point to a certain amount of population and employment growth within the city, and those numbers, like to the extent that they have an impact on the TSP, what the impact is our future conditions analysis, where we start looking at future traffic operations and safety at all the city intersections and on the roadways, and we start projecting what types of issues are you going to see in the future based on this level of growth. And I can tell you that from what we're seeing in the future, we're really only seeing a couple of intersections that are popping up as having operational issues. One of them is obviously 99 in Arlington, which today doesn't, it has safety issues, and it does exceed the operational issues during certain times of the day, but not consistently. In the future, it's just blown out of the water. And then in the southbound approach to the southbound ramp terminal at the I-205 82nd Drive interchange is the other one that has an operational issue in the future. So essentially, and that one is also approaching that today. So that's to say that the travel demand model, I left a piece out of the middle there. The travel demand model is calibrated to existing conditions, and our operations is calibrated to existing conditions. So the population and employment is there as a guideline for us, but it doesn't necessarily have that significant of an influence on how we look at future conditions.
So we're not basically making decisions on density, for example, based on these numbers.
Just Malachi, you have a soft voice.
Sorry.
We're trying to record everything for the website, so thank you.
So just to be clear, so you're not basing any density requirements or anything like that based on these numbers?
So the one area where we do start seeing some of the densities that are reflected in these TAZs influencing some of the things that are in the TSP is in the transit. Because transit is the frequency of transit service, the availability of transit service is ultimately determined by population and employment density. And so whenever we see the higher the density, the more the service, the more frequent the service, and the lower the density, obviously, the less the service. Those densities again are spread out across the TAZs, and so but what we're seeing is that regardless of the population employment growth, you guys are already in a position where a majority of the city is at that density for the minimum service, and so a lot of the transit strategies that were identified essentially we're more or less confirming what TriMet has in their plans for Southeast Portland for new routes, for new service, for increased frequency in service, and essentially confirming that what they've already got in mind is adequate. And in most cases, it is actually above and beyond what we would already have identified in terms of those both coverage and frequency, based on the employment and population that's projected here. So in other words, even despite how much higher these might be, we're still getting service that is exceeding where we are here today. I don't know if that appeases your concerns about it, but it's legitimate. And something that I know we talked about once before, and I'll have to refer to some previous tech memos, but I believe we talked about looking at the Portland State University's population projections both existing and projected population and seeing how they match up. So we can do that in the next month or so.
Randy Roulette. So on your priorities here, you have like low, medium, and high priorities on, for instance, collector streets, bike routes, etc. I noticed a couple of things popped out at me. Was the problem down on Arlington and 99E was not a high priority. Well, that's hard for me to really get on board with that. And then Gloucester Street for bike lanes, one of the recommendations, and that's a high priority, was to remove the on-street parking and widen or remove on-street parking to install bike lanes. And as a collector street, I can understand how that would be based on where it is and the lights that are already installed on Portland Avenue and 99E. I just can't see that happening either, to get bike lanes in to remove parking or even widening the road when there's not even sidewalks on a lot of it.
Both great questions, and just to, can you remind me, the 99 in Arlington, you're probably talking about the long-term improvement that we have identified in there, which involves restricting movements, and is that the one you're talking about, the motor vehicle project? Right. Okay. So it is a long-term improvement for a variety of reasons. The first reason I would say is because there is a near-term improvement, there's a short-term improvement that's couched under safety, and it's because it's not, while it is an operational improvement, it is a motor vehicle-based improvement. It actually would reduce, it would increase the delay at the intersection, and I say that with some caution, because the real issue that we were seeing in 99 Arlington under existing conditions is primarily a safety issue. We understand there's some operational issues, both in terms of the northbound, southbound queues, some of the delays out there, but the bigger issue is a safety issue. It's something that's been on ODOT's radar for a long time. It's on the SPIS list. They haven't evaluated it yet, so they're really looking for us to evaluate that. We've been back and forth with ODOT on this intersection time and time again, and ultimately what we settle on, if you look at the safety improvements, we have a project at that intersection, a near-term project, to reconfigure the approach on Arlington and reconfigure the approach on River Road so that you have a protected left turn movement. When you have a protected left turn movement, it does end up taking away a little bit of the green time for the north-south movement, so it does increase the delay, increases the queue, but pretty minimally by comparison to the safety benefit that you ultimately get by getting that protected left turn lane.
So is there a minimum that light can be red that's going north-south? Is that what the problem is with the traffic? Sorry. So on that signal, is there a minimum that you can have for that, left turn light or whatever would be put there? So the stop for north and south, you can only stop them for so long, correct? Is that what the problem is?
Yes and no. We need to maintain the coordination that's on 99 to the best of our ability. Also, it is, as you know, it's an ODOT facility. They want to do, their priority is definitely their through movement on the highway, or not highway, but on 99. And so to the extent that we can get that left turn movement, and that's, again, one of the reasons why it's under a safety improvement rather than an operational improvement, because we're essentially arguing, we're not trying to improve operations, we're trying to improve safety. And so by adding that left turn lane as a safety improvement, we get that benefit, or we get to take away some green time from the highway and add it to the side street.
Good.
Oh, sorry. One more. Yeah, the Gloucester question, because that's an important one. There's a couple of those on there, and Gloucester is one where today Gloucester is a collector street, and collectors in most communities typically have on-street bike lanes. So these are separated facilities that allow bicyclists to comfortably ride on the side of the street. And the reason why collectors tend to have bike lanes is because they tend to carry a lot more volume than regular streets. Arlington, Dartmouth to an extent, but Gloucester, Glen Echo, as you work your way up, Jennings, as you work your way up, these larger, higher functional classification streets need to have bike lanes to provide that separation, or you're not going to get the level of bicycle activity that you want to get on those streets. That being said, we recognize fully that the impact of widening Gloucester, of widening the segments of Glen Echo that already have bike lanes, of widening Arlington for that matter, not bike lanes, sidewalks and things, widening any one of these streets to allow for on-street bike lanes is going to have a really significant impact on all the adjacent properties. It's likely not going to happen over the 23-year period of the plan. So what we were really looking at is what was most appropriate on these streets, and we considered shared roadway pavement markings. So sharrows, you guys are probably most familiar with that at this point. They're typically most appropriate on streets that have up to about 3,500 ADT. All three of those streets, Arlington, Gloucester, Glen Echo, they're all projected to have more than 5,000, and in the case of Arlington, upwards of 7,500 to 10,000 ADT. So those streets, in order for them to be comfortable bicycle streets, they really need to have separated bike facilities. Try not to use the term separated bike facilities because that means something totally different. But they need to have a separate space for the bicyclist, which is an on-street bike lane. The two options you really have is taking away the on-street parking, which frankly doesn't necessarily belong on a collector street anyway, and adding bike lanes. I know that again that's a huge, very contentious thing to say, but collector streets are primarily, they're in the world, in the philosophical world of transportation planning. Collector streets are intended to provide connections between the arterials and the local streets. They're not intended to serve a lot of access. That's not how your collectors are in the city. I recognize that fully. It's also not how some of your arterials are in the city. Recognize that fully. So it's just about weighing those priorities. That's why there's an "or" in capital letters there. You need to do something to accommodate bicyclists on those streets, and it's my preferred treatment would be taking away the on-street parking and adding on-street bike lanes, but there is an opportunity to widen if that's what you choose to do. And that again, that applies to Arlington, that applies to Gloucester, that applies to Glen Echo.
Yeah.
Well, if I may ask, in regards to like Arlington.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. It's like a bull.
So following up with that, instead of putting bike lanes on Arlington, why not do like Portland's done is next street over, Berkeley?
So we have it should be that those should either be as medium-term projects or long-term projects on all three of those streets. But they are, for the near-term projects, what we have on Arlington, for example, because Arlington is the higher classification, it warrants the higher level of treatment, provides the greatest level of connectivity. We do have a near-term project that would direct folks onto Clackamas, thank you. Cascade, Columbia. Yeah, and Berkeley would be a fine choice as well, as would Hereford, as would any of the other east-west streets that provide that same level of connection. The challenge with that is that it's a good near-term project, and it's included in here for Arlington to provide that same level of connectivity. It's just that in the long term, ultimately, the ideal is that in the long term there will be more opportunities that are more direct, that provide that higher level of connectivity. And Portland does this as well. You'll see most all Portland's arterial and collector streets do have on-street bike lanes, and where they don't, they just about bend over backwards to get people on those side streets. Those side streets, in many cases, are circuitous as a bicyclist from the northeast Portland area. They can be pretty circuitous, and you really got to know where you're going. They don't necessarily. I don't think they inspire as much. They don't as much in terms of just day-to-day commuting and recreational riding as I think like just real comfortable bike lanes on streets. But if that, let me finish that thought. But if that's something that you think we should look at a little bit deeper, there is in the bike plan. Let's see. if you turn to page, and sorry, the figures are not numbered, but if you turn to page 29, 29 is also figure 5. It's the bike plan. If you look here, you can see that we do have a series of streets that we've identified as shared streets. So I think B28 provides that connectivity between Abernathy and Portland Avenue, which would essentially parallel that segment of Glen Echo that currently doesn't have on-street bike lanes. B30 is here. I believe that's Hereford Street. That would essentially be a shared facility that would essentially parallel B18, which is man, this map really needs street names. So good to point that out. So B30 Hereford really is essentially a parallel facility for Gloucester. So we've got that built in. And it should be organized that B30 is the higher priority of the two projects between B30 and B18. Nevertheless, I think in the long term you do still want to see some type of facility along Glen Echo. Gloucester.
Are you ready for the next question?
Yeah. I'm sorry. That one was close to home for me, and I do like that question.
Well, I just have two general questions. The first is that we are considerably late on pulling this TSP update together. So is it something that we're going to have to redo in 5 years, or what is the horizon date for this update?
So TSPs, and trying not to get too philosophical on you, but TSPs have been evolving pretty significantly over the last few years. Your guys' TSP, I believe it was 95 was when it was done previously. Mm-hmm. So it is a bit dated, but it had a lot of good, like, forward-thinking stuff in it already. There was some good stuff in there. I'll say that. I read through the whole thing. Some of the stuff that got carried forward into this TSP, that was brought forward directly from the previous TSP. There is, I'd say, the way that this is organized, where we have both a planned and a financially constrained plan, you're always going to have a backup plan. Theoretically, this plan could carry you for 23 years. You could continue to refer to this. I wouldn't expect that, just because priorities tend to change, because people's preferences tend to change. There's a lot of things that could come and go over that course of that time period. That being said, I think TSPs these days are generally updating every 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And I could see most of the TSPs that I did 5 years ago haven't come back up. The ones that I did 10 years ago are starting to come back up just now, or 7 years ago. I think maybe there's a couple that were done 7 years ago starting to come back. So 5 to 10 years is a pretty good way to go about it. But we're also trying to, we're Kittleson and Angelo actually, we're working collectively on an update to the ODOT's Transportation System Plan Guidelines document. So this is what guides all TSP planning throughout the state of Oregon. And as part of that is we're trying to identify opportunities to really streamline the TSP update process by organizing the TSP in such a way that individual sections can be updated. And it doesn't really jump out at you through this one, but as you might see, there's a fair amount of white space that's built into the TSP, and that's because we were adding section breaks around chapters that we wanted to set up that you could ultimately update those independently if you wanted to. So as you go through, like the transit plan, the bike ped plan, any one of those plans can be taken out, a new one could be written and slid right back into its place, assuming there isn't a lot of overlap or integration with the other plans. But that is the goal, is that you could ultimately break it down into a modal plan and update it individually.
Okay, good. So you don't see us having to go through this process for 10 years, maybe?
10 years,
good.
Pretty safe.
Okay, write that down. Put that in everybody's notes. Also, since all of these code amendments are Title 17, which is a very lengthy process in getting these adopted, are you going to be providing us with the final code language, or is that something that we're going to have to develop separately once this has been finalized? No, I mean the final.
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question, but if I understand it correctly, and I may not get it right, so please correct me, but as part of your packet, we have developed some legislative amendments apart it. So underline strikeout, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
So yeah, we have done the underline strikeout. It is a little abbreviated in terms of we're only taking the subsections of the development code that are proposed for updates, and then we're just kind of dotting the spaces in between. Typically that works, but if you want something a little bit more comprehensive than that, we're happy to help out.
So just to clarify, in our grant funding that we have, Angelo Planning is doing the actual code amendments. We are doing the DLCD proper noticing requirements through the state so that this will eventually be adopted into our comprehensive plan. So yes, we do not have to contract separately to actually have that language drafted. It will be part of the public hearing process that goes to Planning Commission in September and then to the Council in October.
Okay, I was just concerned that staff would then have to take this document and create
No.
final code language.
Yeah.
That would be a
We try and take the pain out of that for you.
I have a question for you for page 16 regarding accessway. And I think I've talked to you about this a little bit already. So when putting the new connectors in, while I understand the reasoning behind it, one of the issues that have come up is complaints from the citizens who live in the newly connected area, because they're concerned that the development, the residents will go walk across that connector and then park in their neighborhood instead. And therefore increases traffic in their neighborhood and increases parking issues in their neighborhood because of the connector. So if we're going to have requirements in there for connectors between two different areas, I think we also have to have something in there that, first of all, deals with making sure that those people are notified as well as the original area, and also that we make sure that people in that area are included in any kind of traffic study that might be done as well, because they are going to be impacted by parking and traffic by anybody who visits the neighborhood and walks across that connector.
So, I think 16 refers to access ways, but I think what you're talking about essentially is one of the code amendments that we're talking about by making those a requirement for new development. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah. No, spots are good. So accessways, in the development code, accessways, as we've recommended it be written in there, are really triggered when block sizes are reaching too big for what is considered reasonable to walk around. And so the idea is
What was that? What?
block sizes. So when
Okay.
like when a block size, and I don't recall off the top of my head what exactly it is. I want to say it's maybe 800 feet. So when it gets above that, the idea is that you want to start bisecting that with access ways for people to walk. And I have a feeling that it's pretty kind of boilerplate standards in this case. And I have a feeling that that's hardly going to come up in Gladstone, because Gladstone is, for the most part, largely developed out with the street network.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So when a developer goes and he puts in a new apartment complex, for example, right, it's going to include access ways and connectors, both, to neighboring areas.
Yes. So that would probably fall under on-site pedestrian circulation when you're proposing multifamily developments or retail establishments. The idea is that you want to make sure there's an on-site system of sidewalks that connect to adjacent areas. And
right, so that's what I'm getting at. So up until now, the developers are only concerned with their primary driveway into their property.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the people who are affected by people walking from that property out into these other neighborhoods and parking there aren't being noticed that this land use is happening, and they're not included in the traffic study because they're not the primary entrance. So what I'm saying is, in either case, if another neighborhood is going to be impacted because of these requirements, we need to make sure they're included in the notification process, and they're also included in any traffic studies.
Yeah, so what you're getting at is a little bit higher level with the development code in terms of your type 1, 2, 3 processes, and each one of those has a very defined notification process in terms of who gets notified within the immediate area. We're not proposing to change any of those standards as part of that, and honestly, we haven't. Since we haven't changed it, I'm not familiar with what development proposals would trigger those types of notices.
Well, I mean, for example, putting a connector in needs to. Because if that doesn't happen, then we're going to have to deny the connector because those people were not notified of the land use.
I see.
They weren't allowed to even voice their opinion, right?
Do you have?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, if it's part of the new code that's being added, it should be included as part of that.
Right. I think we just need to take a look at where that sounds like something that might actually impact a few different sections of the code. So we're going to need to take a look at where that goes. Okay. But I do know where you're coming from, and I feel like we've talked about this before. It's come up in other companies. Okay. That might be what it was. All right. Good question.
Some of our other infrastructure master plans are used to generate system development charges for new development. Does this kind of a plan also, is it used for that purpose? So for the example, a development might pay for sidewalks or help pay for bike lanes or something that are adjacent to it?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. System development charges can be used to fund a lot of this project, particularly where you're increasing the capacity of the system to accommodate that new development, where you're providing on-street bike lanes or sidewalks where they're not today, where you're providing capacity improvements at intersections to accommodate that growth in population employment. A lot of those different areas they're all fully SDC creditable. Other things can be partially SDC creditable depending upon what the nature of the improvement is. I'd say it's not necessarily part of what our work is, but it's typically something that follows the development of a TSP is identifying what is 100% and what is partial, but certainly we would count on SDCs being able to fund a good chunk of this stuff.
On page number 39, the limited and or flexible parking requirements. I'm sure you know I would bring it up. So you had in here a section about us allowing pay in lieu fees instead of constructing parking. I mean, we already know the issues regarding the community's view on parking requirements. I don't see pay in lieu engendering the community's support.
Okay. Yeah, we can take that out. That's certainly taking this out is an option. I believe we had comments about out of project TDM3 before, which was related to limited or flexible parking requirements, where we essentially cleaned up the language in the project description, but not in the description of the overall description. So we can certainly remove it. I think maybe one alternative, and again, this is just fully intended to increase the flexibility of providing parking from the developer standpoint. So one of the things that we have seen some folks do, this sort of goes hand in hand with what CJ was saying before about allowing developers to use off-site parking to accommodate their parking requirements. Some developers I've seen in, I think Oregon City has used this. I know Portland's used it in a few places, but they allow developers to pay this fee in lieu to a municipal parking facility or to a shared parking facility, or I don't want to say the word garage, but to some sort of a facility that can be shared amongst a number of different users, so that they don't again have to accommodate that parking on site. So a fee in lieu has been used for that type of thing before, but it certainly doesn't have to be described in that way. I think what CJ is doing doesn't necessarily, or what taking this out wouldn't preclude it from happening that way, but it might make it a little more prevalent. So I can take it out.
Okay, let's try another one. Page 44, the access spacing variances. I just had a quick question about this. It says that the Public Works Director will be the one to modify and waive access spacing standards. Planning Commission is not involved with that?
Take that one, Jim? Yeah.
I guess so.
So the question was whether or not the Public Works Director would involve the Planning Commission in waiving access spacing standards.
I had the same question.
Yeah.
That's kind of worm. Could be.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
There's a can of worms.
yeah, I know. And would I feel comfortable with that? Probably not.
Okay. Well, we can certainly add Planning Commission, City Council. We can add as many different people in there as you like.
I'm not sure what the correct wording would be. I just thought it seemed a little odd that the Planning Commission was not involved in granting variances on land use.
Not necessarily land use, but the access spacing. Is that, or does it specify land use as well?
I mean, it's talking about the spacing, let's see, physical site characteristics, layout of budding property and stuff. I mean, this is stuff that would normally come before us.
Okay. Okay.
We'll look at that in the development code to make sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, before we get away from that comment, I'll say that the public at the discretion of the Public Works Director, that shows up here in a few places. Another place where that comes up is the roadway standards, the cross-sectional standards, the whether or not a sidewalk is going to be required, whether or not on-street parking is going to be allowed in certain areas. A lot of those things are at the discretion of the Public Works Director.
Yeah, and I did see you mention that a few times, specifically with regards to like you might make changes due to like sewer requirements, and I thought you might need to do it for utilities as well.
It's hard to say what type of issues will come up, and I think that's why it's in there as an option.
I think it might need to be more generic than just sewer. Currently, it says just sewer.
This topic isn't, in terms of the Public Works Director, isn't something that I haven't gotten too deeply into the development code, but it's certainly something we'll look at. Oftentimes, the decision for the Public Works Director to do that is because the Planning Commission feels comfortable for them to do that role. It's a personal preference, and that's fine. One of the kind of split the hair approaches with that, and other jurisdictions have done, is to give the Public Works Director the option to elevate that if they don't feel comfortable making those kind of decisions. And the whole idea is to keep the Planning Commission's workload from being overfilled if you feel like that's been an issue before.
On when you get to your proposed amendments on 174830C or 1C, you talk about where it could be shown that the peak parking demands are actually less. So the developers that we've had come before us, obviously not all of them, but some of them, you know, they sometimes, I'm trying to look at my note here, you know, they will try and say that, you know, not everybody's going to be at home in the apartment complex at the same time, therefore they need less parking requirements, things like that. So I think we need to be really careful about how we word this so that, you know, we're not saying that, oh, well, you know, not everybody works during the day, so therefore you need less parking spaces.
Yeah, this is shared parking. Well, I'll let you'll probably want to chime in on it too, but the idea is that we don't want to be overburdensome with parking requirements. And you're right, it's the impetus is on the developer to make that case, and oftentimes developers will need to or should hire a transportation engineer to make that assessment, and so it's based off of a professional judgment. So I would hope a transportation engineer wouldn't cook the book, so to speak, to make it easier for the developer to lower parking requirements.
On the, I've got a few of these here.
So real quick on that same note, I believe it's, and I hope I'm not mistaken, but I believe it's regarding the ability of two different uses to share parking. And so what that essentially is saying is, in a mixed use environment, you have two different types of land uses with two fundamentally different types of parking demand profiles. And you've probably seen this, and there's a lot of areas where, residential development typically looks something like this, where you have really high peaks in the morning and in the evening, and then nothing really going on in the middle of the day. Whereas like a typical commercial one is more like that, with really low with a high peak in the middle of the day and low during the ends of the day. So what you find is that you get to actually share, rather than having parking to accommodate the peaks for both of those, you share that parking by evaluating what those peaks are for the two different uses.
Sure, but in the case of, like, say, a building that has residence and commercial in the same building,
right,
that does not apply to, say, holidays, where a peak for a holiday would be that they're both there at the same time.
Correct. We try not to plan for holidays.
174830, the H, the new one, regarding the offsite parking. You talk about allowing for a parking lot that is not connected to the lot that's being developed. It is unclear if we allow for a lot to be between them. This has come up before, recently, where a lot was not connected. So it would be useful for us in the code to know what the criteria is, if there is a specific distance, or if they have to be connected properties, or whatever that criteria is. Mm-hmm. If it's too vague, it causes problems for us.
So the way this is written and the intention of this is I'm hesitant to say that there are properties between the parking structure and the proposed development, but in a way there is, because the way it's worded is that there needs to be some type of sidewalk or similar facility that provides a connection no longer than 500 feet between the nearest parking spot and the door. Now, that 500 feet could go around a lot and still meet the definition of the standard here. Okay. So by that respect, I mean, if you're interested in if you think that's too loose, we can tighten that up. The easiest way would be to reduce that 500 feet of walking distance.
I'm less concerned about the actual 500 than I am about just specifying whether it's allowed.
Okay.
And pro or con doesn't matter to me as much as making sure it's spelled out.
So it's spelled out in terms of
whether it's allowed or not.
Okay. Is that something that you don't want to include in the development code? Then we can certainly remove the language.
I think that in the case of, like, commercial properties and stuff, it probably makes sense to allow for property in between.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't specify it and say none of us are on the planning commission anymore, then it's back up to them to try to interpret whether that was something that was intended. And so we don't want to leave it up to interpretation. We want them to spell out whether or not it's allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'd feel more comfortable if it specified that this application was really directed more toward commercial property and shared use of, say a doctor's office that only has hours until 5 and a restaurant that has hours in the evening could share a parking lot or a large parking structure in a downtown area. But when you talk about residential parking, you don't necessarily want your citizens who live in a residential building to be parking in what's intended to be for shoppers and you know, retail users, that sort of thing. Maybe what we need to do is make a distinction between this rule as it applies to a commercial district and as it would apply to multifamily housing district.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, the interest here is to kind of bifurcate the standard and have a stricter standard for multifamily residences and something similar to what's currently here, but just applicable to commercial development.
Just a suggestion, you know. Commercial and industrial. And industrial too, yeah.
No. And just to be clear, the off-site parking requirement isn't is separate than the shared use parking that was that Matt provided a really great illustration over. Off-site parking can be for a single use. So if you just propose a multifamily development, or if you just propose a retail office, basically anything as it's written right now, anything except for a single-family dwelling could use this standard to meet the parking requirement.
So we'll go on to the next one. So a couple paragraphs down on 174840, number 3C2, the do not obstruct primary emergency response route. So the way I read that, that would prevent this from happening on Portland Avenue. Because, you know, our fire trucks go up and down Portland Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's intended. I just wanted to call that out.
No. That's a good thing to look at here. Portland Avenue is a very functional street with a lot of uses going on. And that's one of the challenges of having a main street that has so many uses on it, is to balance the needs versus the emergency needs. So we'll definitely take a look at that and see how we can reword that to be sensitive to emergency response routes.
And the next one, 174850, I've got two. So on 1B, you need to specify whether public-private access is allowed or required. Right now, it just says that the spaces are there, but it doesn't say whether or not they're open to the public or whether you can make them private only or whatever. And then the next one, C, does not. It says how many spaces are required, but it does not specify how many of them have to be short-term or how many of them have to be long-term, or if it's up to the developer.
So your question was what the distribution of short-term, long-term bicycle parking spaces are?
If it needs to be specified or not. And also whether or not those spaces in the previous, on B, whether or not we need to specify whether it is public access, private access, or up to the developer as well. So both those currently are up to the developer to do whatever they want, and I don't know if that's intended.
So short-term bicycle parking spaces are intended to be available to anyone.
Okay.
The idea is it's a typical staple rack in front of a business that someone who's visiting can ride their bike and park it for however long they stay during the afternoon, evening, or morning. Long-term bicycle spaces are intended to be for either, in the case of multifamily residences, people who live there; in the case of retail establishments, people who work there. The long-term spaces, to answer your question, is intended for the people who use it on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I understand who it's designed for,
right.
But these two items don't specify what the constraints are on the developer.
So in terms of what the minimum requirements are for each.
So B, the developer could decide they're all private access only. They made the bicycle rack, but they're all private. And C, they could decide they're all long-term use only.
Mm-hmm.
There's no requirement for short-term. It just says they have to have bicycle. So a developer looking at this could say, I have, 5% long-term private access only bicycle parking.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's intended, so I think that needs to be specified.
We can make that change for you. So, yeah, the way it reads right now, as you've interpreted, is there's a minimum, but not a minimum like you must provide this many bike parking spaces for one of the categories. In this case, it's long-term, but there's nothing stopping a developer from having 100% long-term spaces.
Or all private.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the implication is that the long-term space is intended for the people who use it.
Right. On 1750-40, I just talked about this a minute ago, the public works thing. You mentioned that they may require alternatives for stormwater management. That needs to be expanded to include everything the public works covers, utilities, etc. Stormwater isn't the only reason they may need to make the alterations. Sorry.
You want me to hold it for you? That way you can talk with your hands. There you go.
The connector street thing, that was on 1750-40 3E, and we already talked about that, about the issue that needs to be addressed there. On 1750-10 2B, there is a comment there about lighting. We need to make sure that they're following our lighting requirements, the dark sky, etc., not just putting random lights in.
Are there
There are requirements in the code.
okay.
Yeah, we have lighting standards in the code, yeah. The C under that, the next one, concerns me, and that is that if there is a project identified in the TSP, it doesn't require any review because it's allowed outright.
Yeah, that's a recent statewide planning goal requirement. It's designed to take a little bit of the duplication efforts that have gone into creating the package of projects that went into the TSP. The idea there being that the projects in the TSP have been identified and gone through a public process, and the idea is that part of that public process doesn't have to be recreated.
But the concern is that, according to our TSP, 20 years from now, they may go and check the mark saying, okay, we're going to do this project now, but none of that data may be still valid. Right?
It's very well possible, yeah.
So I personally, I would feel like, while it's a good idea that we address things that are in the TSP, they shouldn't be allowed outright without review. And I understand if there's some statewide goals that we have to address, we have to do that. But I think we need to be careful about allowing things to go through without review.
Well, and it's not going to be outright isn't necessarily the poor choice of words in this case, because there's still a lot of engineering studies that need to be conducted in order for a project to go from planning to construction. And oftentimes those will have their own set of requirements that create a checks and balance for ensuring that it meets the needs and designs that the project's intended for.
So usually when something's permitted outright, the county will approve it without bringing it before, say, Planning Commission as an example. So we need to be careful with those wordings specifically. You want something to say?
Just a quick question. Did you say it's a rule or a goal? 'Cause there's a big difference there. Is it a planning goal or rule? Things that come out of LCDC and Salem can be very, very restricting and very, very specific. And I'm just kind of curious. I think maybe we need to get a copy of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide that. It's I can't tell you the verb, but yeah, it's in the revised statutes.
On 1750, what's the number here? 4B and C. No, it's 4B. And it's talking about how the roads and streets through an adjacent site, that needs to include via the connectors. So the connectors need to be counted as connected sites for this particular use. This is about the study areas. There's a couple places on that same page that talk about the public works supervisor probably needs to include planning commission as well. And on 176420, the blocks code, under sizes, you mentioned as modified by GMC 1750-30. It needs to also go according to 1750-20, which, let me back up, that was the vehicular and pedestrian circulation section. So it needs to reference that as well. And then you have 1770-10 duplicated twice.
Yes, I
Okay, I'm
apologize
done with
about that.
questions. Does somebody else want to ask questions?
If I could, I'm real big on the connectors, and what you find is that if you don't put in a good connector, what you have is a place full of beer bottles or a place that people are using as an illegal connector. So I think it really is money well spent. And on your connections here, one of the projects we'll be able to eliminate because a developer is actually building a road and putting sidewalks in there, and it's under construction now on is it Tyron or Tryon? Tyron Court. So we're not going to need to do a connector there because there's a street and sidewalks and everything there. Yeah, it's figure 7 in your diagrams of the maps, which would be page 50. 49 has the list, and you see Tyron Court there. Right now they are literally building the street and eliminating that trail that wandered through there. And that's really going to be good for the high school because we can have the kids not walking down at Glen Echo and Portland Avenue, which we could spend all of our TSP money on.
Second. Well, on that, can I follow up on the...
Microphone.
Yeah.
Here.
So I wanted to clarify on that Tyrone Creek there, the sidewalk doesn't go all the way through, so there's still some missing, outside of their project. So it might need to be in there just for that.
So following up on Kenmore Street, that runs into a cliff from behind the high school. So I'm curious as to how that made the map. And then the one up Portland Avenue all the way through to Jennings, that's in the county.
Yeah.
Kind of out of our jurisdiction.
Okay. First off, happy to take either of those out, but at the same time, I guess I'll just say the way that we come up with these little red arrows in some communities that don't have as much connectivity or don't have as developed of a network as you guys have, you see a lot more of these red arrows. So in our case, we were kind of stretching to find them. Essentially, we put them in where the underlying or where the land use is inconsistent with the underlying zoning. And so in the case of the one behind the high school there, that one it's a vacant piece of property that's back there, and so that arrow is essentially trying to show that is where we want to see the connection to that property occur. It could occur from either that street to the back or to the other street to the front, but essentially trying to create that level of connectivity through that property as it redevelops. That being said, I'll admit we didn't actually go to look to see if there was a cliff right there. So if there's a cliff right there, it's just to say that it's likely not going to be feasible for them to do that. The one out on Portland Avenue, we recognize that that's outside of the city limits, of course, and this is something that it's been on some form of this map throughout most of this project, is because we see providing another connection to Portland Avenue from Jennings as a real benefit to the community. You're relying less and less on all of these major intersections on 99 to access the community. You're not going to see as many people getting to Portland Avenue via Glen Echo, Gloucester, or Arlington for that matter, if they can get there through from Jennings up to the north.
No, I've always been baffled. I've always been baffled why Portland Avenue didn't go all the way through there by Candy Lane, and where you have to actually go around to Rose. I used to live off of Hull back 35 years ago, and the amount of traffic on Hull. I mean, the county ended up putting speed bumps to slow down people because of the amount of traffic trying to get out, north of town that way.
Right.
So I'm not saying I like the idea. Don't get me wrong. Like I say, I've always been baffled since back before even moving into town, why it didn't go all the way through. So thanks.
Yeah, we'll definitely revisit the Kenmore Street one, and we'll take out the Tavern Court one, or we could just check it off the list. It's complete.
And one more comment about the one on Portland Avenue. If we're relocating City Hall and the police station farther north on Portland Avenue, that could make it easier for police vehicles to access some of those neighborhoods that are farther to the east. They could go directly down Portland Avenue and turn on Jennings.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of shifts the center of gravity a little bit in terms of civic buildings farther north, and so that connection makes a lot of sense. Whether we have the right to do it as a city, if it's on county land, is something else. But I can certainly see the benefit of including it, for those reasons.
I got another question then. So curiosity, on page 26, on the bike plan improvement, B6 about, no, I'm sorry. I misunderstood about, I was thinking of something else in regards to McLaughlin. Disregard. But I like the idea of reducing the speed on Oakfield to accommodate not only bicycles, but we have a lot of pedestrians, and there isn't a lot of sidewalks. I mean, a lot of all the way. I mean, there is some on some sides, some on others. It's not, consistent. So that sounds like a good idea.
The reason why the speed reduction projects are largely included within the bike plan is because, it could just as easily be in the PED plan, and it's because vehicular speeds have a significant impact on how comfortable pedestrians and bicyclists are utilizing that street. So the higher the speeds, the less comfortable it is to bike or to walk on the side of the road. And so what the actual speeds that are reflected in the project list are intended to reach that next level of comfort for, to gain the more riders that we can possibly gain. So that's why they're there.
Yeah. Sorry, I was on the wrong page and table. Page 18, table 3. So P3 is McLaughlin speed reduction. Did you talk with ODOT very much about this? Because we had requested last year and got a reply back in November that they weren't interested in lowering the speed on McLaughlin from 40 down to anything.
We have talked to ODOT about it, and we actually talked to ODOT about it just last week when they looked at the draft plan and saw that it was still on there. I think it's still there mostly because I think it's still something that the community really wants to see on the plan. And as much as ODOT doesn't want it to be on the plan, I think it's just something that is important both in the near term and long term. And I think eventually ODOT will. I shouldn't say this because we're being recorded, but eventually ODOT will get around to the idea that just going out and doing a speed study, seeing that people are driving 48 miles per hour, and so they can't drop the speed down to 35 miles per hour. It's not going to instigate the type of change that you want to see on 99 through your community. So I think having it on the plan, even if it's shown as a medium project, means that it's something that it's meaningful to you, and we'll keep it on there until someone insists that it comes out.
So, Matt, I'm going to do a process check at this point. Conceptually, high level, have we addressed everybody's main questions if you take out semantics and maybe some edits that we need to make? When do you want final comments from this group?
So we're in a window now right now where the hearing is until I believe September 19th. I think is the next time. And I believe that the distribution of the packets for that first hearing for the Planning Commission is it 1 week or is it 2 weeks for the hearing?
1 week before.
So we would need at least a week prior to that. So working backwards from the 19th, I would say in an ideal world we'd have a collective set of comments from everybody by the 5th, by September 5th.
Okay.
I think that'd be the weekend following Memorial Day weekend. That would give us a week to address the comments, get it back in a revised version to you guys going into the hearing. I see you've got a good number of tabs on your paper. You haven't said what they all are.
Actually, Malachi asked most, if not all, the one. I did have one typo I was going to just bring to your attention afterwards.
Okay.
Unless you want it now.
Yeah.
So I think on page 61, under motor vehicle plan, it should be table 20 instead of 16, and figure 10. I could be wrong. That's why I got a big question mark by it.
So yeah, September 5th would be ideal. Obviously anything before would be great. And if there's any functional changes, I'll tell you, I'll be honest, this is it's a little different than some of the previous TSPs that we put together. A lot of previous TSPs that I've worked for, just the one we did one for West Lynn not even a year ago, and it's about 280 pages long, and it was painful for everybody throughout that process. Had a lot of stuff about existing conditions, had a lot of stuff about alternatives and solutions and evaluations and the stuff that nobody really wanted to read. They wanted to read, what is the plan? And so we really tried to emphasize the plan in this plan and take away a lot of the fluff and make sure that it's still available in the technical appendix. So if there's anything that you feel like needs to be included in here, anything that it could be cut down on here, we're certainly open to all suggestions, and anything that would make it essentially more usable for you guys going forward is what we're looking for.
Okay. Any other questions for Matt or CJ? Lot of milestones met on this project, lots of citizen involvement, and we're almost there. So, thank you, gentlemen, for coming this evening. And Neil. So I think what we'll do is, real quickly, I'm going to have Tammy pull up. How many of you have not seen the new website? In anticipation. Okay. You got your picture up there. You did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. Wow. So this morning, Google transferred over our new website. Lovely. And this is what's launched right now. We look like a very professional government agency. We're very proud of the work that we put into this. We know that it comes at a very good time for us. All of the department heads spent a lot of time putting in information so that we can improve how we're communicating with the citizens. My intent tonight was not to go through this thoroughly with you. It was to launch it because I think these two bodies are the best way for us to say, hey, we're ready to move forward. This will complement nicely as we start planning for our town hall meeting on October 18th. We now have a social media policy. We have Facebook. We have Twitter. So this is the start of something that you are going to see refreshed weekly, and we're also working with the local photographer on getting some more photos of Gladstone area. I think, Tammy, if we could just go to government, city council, and meet your council, you will see they had their pictures professionally taken, except Tom's is in black and white, but we were even able to get Pat's up there today. And so really what we're striving for is that professional uniform look for the city of Gladstone. And it's a work in progress, but I think as you navigate it through either on your mobile device or your laptop, you will find that there's a lot of information there. And especially, I think, if you go back to home, you click up to the left, right there in the meeting where it says meetings and events, if you click there, all city committee meetings and events will show up on that page. So basically, if Lauren Gunderson is working on library updates on her site and she plugs in a meeting, or as you can see, they have baby story time, it will update on her calendar, but it automatically goes to the main calendar. So everything that we have going citywide is now going to be where you can just click on the front page and access that information.
Hey Jackie, those links there, will they take you directly to the agenda for that meeting?
If Tammy clicks on, let's see.
Well, tonight.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
It goes to the PDF that you can click on, and then it will go there. Anyway, that's your website. We work hard.
Yeah.
Jackie, I did use the website tonight. It doesn't work before I came. Secondly, I have a question. On my computer, those trees actually look like they have green leaves on them. I'm wondering why the leaves are brown. Not only on that, but on the page that we've got in the packet.
Well, you know, she sent it to us in a couple of different tints for the colors, and so what the front page will do, and this is what we're striving for, is it actually will rotate 4 pictures at a slow motion. And so we're going to work with the photographer to try to get some different photos so that we have some seasonal photos as well on Gladstone. It was quite interesting because a lot of cities use their civic buildings, and we didn't want to do that.
Next year.
Next year, we will.
I think there's drone photography recruiters. You mentioned Neil that maybe for our parks department, we could have the drone photos of each of our city parks.
Yeah, and those are all ideas. I think I'm very pleased. Jim and Marta put a lot of time into public works because there are so many micro sites that they have there as well. And I think if we go to Parks and Recreation Division, we have information there. And I think one of them, Jim, has a map of where the parks are on there as well. So play around with it, but please know that it still is a work in progress. But we're very pleased with this. So it's supposed to be more user-friendly, and our goal, like I said, is to get more information out there so you have it accessed.
And just to add to that, our goal is to keep it fresh and relevant, so you want to go there, not just go, well, I was there last year, it's the same thing when I go back. We want you to go there to see what's going on. So it's our goal, all the department heads, to keep it relevant. So that's.
So we've been posting links on Nextdoor sites and like planning commission or city council packets and stuff. Do we know if those links still work, or do we need to do?
I believe they're still the same. Colin Black is our social media guru, and he's actually going to be taking a lot of the information and pushing it out on Nextdoor as well, so that people have that. There might be some hiccups, but let us know those so that we can make sure they're getting fixed. So if you want to move on to our agenda, we have a vacancy. that we need to talk about how we want to fill it, and chairperson and the mayor and I met to talk about a process, and Randy really liked the process that we did for filling the vacancy for the city council position, so we're proposing to create a committee made up of 2 city council, 2 planning commission, and 2 citizens. So what Tammy has, and I believe Randy and Pat are not going to be able to participate in the actual interviews, correct? So they asked to have their name not put in just for that reason. So do you want to do planning commission, Tammy?
Yep.
We'll draw 2 names, and then we asked that if citizens wanted to participate, that they be here tonight, and we would have them fill their names out. And I can work on that piece.
Jackie, what are the interviews?
I believe we're going to hold the application open until the 30th, or did we say the 22nd?
The 22nd for the planning commission,
Okay.
correct.
And then the interviews will be the first week of September. And we will make the appointment at the September 12th City Council meeting.
I'll let you pick out of that.
Oh, am I drawing?
You get to draw.
Natalie Smith. How many am I drawing?
2.
Libby West.
So Natalie and Libby are the 2 planning commissioners. And are all counselors going to be
What was the dates again?
available?
The first week of September.
I'm back to school, so it'd have to be.
So do we want everyone in?
I'm gone.
Oh, no. Okay. So everyone
I'll give
other
it a
than Counselor Tracy?
Councilor McManus will be out from the 6th on through the 11th back on council night.
So Counselor McMahon and Counselor Tracy are the only 2 not to include.
Need to go buy your Powerball tickets too, everyone. I think it's up over 500 million.
How many libraries can we buy with that?
We could fix the whole town. Tom Mercereau.
Tom Mercereau
Linda Neese.
and Denise.
And there was 2 citizens that signed
Okay.
up.
So we have 2 citizens, and that is Bill Osborne and Susan Liston.
Good. When is the announcement going out? Does the public already know that there's
It is on the website, and it is in the newsletter, and that's...
We're going to also take the applications that were submitted at the first of the year and contact them to see if they're still interested for that.
A comment. The last time we did this process, it seemed to me the most valuable part of it was the public interviews, open to everyone, available to all the council members to see, to use in making their decision. The recommendation coming from the interviewing committee, since the decision is ultimately to be made by the council itself, perhaps, in my mind, it might be better to get comments or feedback or criteria or something from the interviewing committee, but not actual recommendations, so that the council is not either put in the position of looking like they are allowing another group to take their role in making the decision, or disrespecting the decision that the interviewing group make by making an alternative decision. Do others see value in that?
I disagree with you.
You disagree, okay. Okay.
Wholeheartedly. I think that if we're gonna have a committee, then let's take the recommendations. You don't have, if you choose not to, like the last time, then you need to face up to it and answer for it. I think if we're gonna involve the public and we're really transparent and open government, that's what we do.
Then I think you need to change the title of the committee from recommendation committee to selection committee.
It's not a selection, no, because the city council selects it.
But you're contradicting yourself with what you just said.
No, I'm saying you don't have to take the recommendation because city council has a right to either accept or not. Right?
And I think
So we
that's
have a
what Michael
committee
was
that's
trying to
make a
impress upon.
recommendation because we're open and we're trying to involve the citizens in the government.
Understood. And I think that's what Michael was trying to impress upon.
I get it.
Hey, you're not indicating that.
I'm not?
So
I'm not.
So the question is it a selection committee or is it a recommendation?
It has to be a recommendation because the city council makes the final decision, like the last time when you got appointed.
So why not his friendly amendment? I mean, that's basically what Michael was saying.
I would add something, and that is that while I love the idea of citizen participation, I had my concerns and I expressed them in the initial process, and the outcome and some of the political banter that went on afterwards was troubling, and I think that's where Michael's coming from. As much as I like the citizens involved, at the same time, we've just had a selection process, much like the library committee a couple of years back, where how many people are here? No offense to anyone, but how many citizens have a right or an opportunity or are aware that they could be here tonight to be on the committee? So, while initially I like the idea of the committee, but I feel what we're really doing is we're putting it on a committee to make a decision, and then if people don't like it, it gets played both ways. We have enough division in this community, and the reason that I'm really not comfortable with this process and really wasn't that comfortable with using it the way we did and adapting it and changing it, figuring out as we went. This is not a good time for us to be making a bunch of changes in how we're doing things. And I believe that we're complicating the process and we're creating more discord. And I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just troubled by some of how this is going, and I believe that ultimately, truly, the decision obviously is up to the council, and that how much input we give them versus how much influence we have over them are two different things.
But with a little bit, this process is pretty similar to what the library's been doing for years, except with a couple of tweaks. One, the library for years has interviewed applicants and made recommendations, and whereas this process, instead of having the planning commission interview and make recommendations, we're using 6 other individuals from 3 different entities doing the same thing, and I think it opens it up to more questions, more people involvement. I never disagreed with the way the library made their selections. Only thing that I've questioned over the years is that they were the only commission, board, or committee that did it that way. And I like the idea that we're kind of in the process of standardizing.
Well, that's actually not really true. Planning commission makes recommendations to city council all the time.
No, I'm talking about selecting individuals
For
their commissions. But no, you're right. Planning commission does, and they're not always followed. when they get to the council.
Okay, so I've got Michael, Pat, Libby.
One other thing is that one difference with the Planning Commission is that there is a criteria that's part of, I don't know where it appears in the code or whatever, the charter, that talks about a preference toward people who have some actual background that would something that would relate to it. And if the interview committee is going to make recommendations, it might be helpful for the recommendations to also let us know whether people were chosen because the interview committee felt they had that necessary qualification, or because they wanted to balance the recommendations with, say, a person who does have that with a person who doesn't have that, or some other. It just a little more feedback as to the reasons why people were recommended might smooth over the process if the decision is made to continue to use recommendations. Well, I just wanted to mention, I wasn't at the last time the city did interviews, but we had a fairly contentious planning commission meeting on this apartment complex, and our chairman, along with the city attorney, I thought did an excellent job of letting the air out of the balloon in the room by explaining what the very specific and legal role for the planning commission was in that situation. And I think if people being interviewed in this process were told very specifically that this is a recommendation only, that the city council is under no specific responsibility to appoint who is recommended, that it's solely their choice, and we're simply an advisory committee. If you make that position clear to them, I think it eliminates a lot of the maybe unhappiness with people who were recommended because they were going to be appointed to those positions. So upfront education always works well.
Libby?
Well, I was curious, so the library then makes a recommendation for hiring the librarian or people on the library board?
No, I'm talking about the library board, the members themselves.
Do they process? So I mean, to me, that would make sense in that the planning would do it that way also. I don't understand why there'd be a difference in changing it. That's been working well for the library.
So right now, the city council appoints two committees. And what we did in the city council position was an extra layer, an extra committee, but ultimately it is the city council that makes the appointment. Like I said, the mayor and Chair Roulette and I discussed this, and they liked that process. And I think what we're trying to do here is talk about it, is maybe clear the air on some of the things that didn't go right last time, so that as we go into this, because if I hearing correctly, you guys are fine with having the committee do the process, but there needs to be a little bit more detail into how the recommendations are being made when those come forth to council. But also it needs to be clear that if the council does not have to accept the committee's recommendation. In order to do that, we would have to modify the charter and the council rules to do that. Natalie?
I wasn't a part of the last process of the recommendation. But what I'd like to suggest, maybe you already did this the last time, is have certain questions so that you get the criteria very defined as to being able to assess each candidate's qualifications, and actually do it 1 through 10 and have them circle it on each one. And that way you'd have a very unbiased, statistical way of gathering who scored the highest.
Yeah, I think
Okay, I didn't know.
one of the things, like, I've been on several interview panels for hiring at Multnomah County. And one of the things we did is we had predetermined questions that, we submitted, so maybe we could have like something that came up as predetermined. I think saying it's a selection committee is wrong, because we're not selecting. The people on the panel are making a recommendation to city council, and here's the criteria, and you can take it or leave it.
And, we should be clear on this. Every committee does that, right? The Charter Review Committee, Library Advisory Committee, et cetera. They've all made recommendations, and it's all under the purview of City Council whether or not to accept them.
every single committee does.
Going back in recent history, how it got here in the first place, there was this overall feeling in the community that it was a good old voice system, and if you were somebody's friend, you were going to get in. If you weren't, so the politics of it really skewed how the appointments were made. And there were not, in fact, I made the argument, if you hire an administrator, you hire an assistant administrator, department head, you interview everybody. I mean, I wouldn't hire somebody. I did it for years. You don't hire people without interviewing them. And that's how this all started out, and it was to get a process in place to show transparency to the community to get trust. Because as much as it is functional right now at times in the council meetings and in the commission meetings, it's trying to get processes in place so that there's a structure really helps the basic community understand it, and they need to participate so that they feel like they're being heard. And in the end it goes, just like this last one, you guys were, I sat through every one of those to listen to all the questions. Regardless, I think that the system worked, but in the end the charter is very clear about the council makes the appointment, period. So they can override whatever. And in this case, there were a lot of people that didn't like it, a lot of emotional stuff. It didn't work as well as it probably could have. But here again, that was only the first go at it. And I think that time will help heal all of that. And you guys are there to, I mean, that's going to be on your shoulders now, and you can explain it. But I think how it's handled is really, by the council, will be the determining factor whether or not it's going to be successful. But the community has a right to be involved in it and hear it, because they're the ones that elected everybody that's on the council. Well, except the appointments right now, but I mean, normally you're elected by these people and they want to be heard. And your job as a council, as my understanding is, that you need to listen to them and at least let them have input. And that's why I think it's really critically important that it be done in a process where there is a process that's structured.
And I wouldn't disagree with that, not at all. And I think it needs to be very transparent, because it's very hard to get back to business if you're constantly listening to the echo chamber or having the echo chamber involved with it. And I think that's why when Michael was going forward with this motion and talking about it, that's where I'm backing in. My apologies for anything I'm not a little bit harsh. But I think that what happened right after it was, it's a selection committee. That's all I heard. That's all I heard over and over and over for days. So we have to establish that it's not a selection committee, that it is in fact an advisory committee. And going back to everybody that's commented on it, if that's the base where we're starting, then we're going to be successful in being able to do it and listen to the advice that was spoken of. My apologies.
One other suggestion I had, and again, something you kind of learn from the process, is there was some feeling afterwards that some candidates had the advantage of being able to sit in the room and listen to other candidates being interviewed prior to their being interviewed themselves. In a job hiring situation, you would never have a job applicant in the room during another job applicant's interview. We may want to see whether we have a waiting area for applicants while interviews are going on, so that someone can't be taking notes and mentally preparing their response to the questions and give a very well prepared answer. I don't know that somebody's ability to think on their feet is necessarily a criteria for a criterion for making a decision, but I think it would appear more fair if candidates were interviewed one at a time.
I'm looking at nods, so I'm going to take that as a consensus.
Yes.
And I think what we want to do is, we have standardized questions that we put together, and we got input from the last committee on what those should be. I think we should videotape it. It should be open to the public. We can have a waiting room for the applicants, and I think these are all really good, healthy discussions, and this is the reason why we're having this, is because we all know that this was a hot topic, and we don't want to repeat that. And so I think we all agree that we want to have a process, and me as staff just needs to make sure that we're being more clear about what that process is going to be in the staff report, in the recommendation. But I sense that we're there.
I would also recommend that maybe Randy and Sandy get together to go over the list of questions to see if maybe even tweaking for planning commission.
Will this be videotaped and all the deliberations videotaped?
We are gonna, yes,
I
and
mean,
do the
all
same
the
process.
deliberations so we don't stop. in the
Sure, and
middle.
if a city
We need as
councilor
much-
wants to watch the interviews,
sure.
they're welcome to take the DVD and watch them as well, just like we did the last time. So what I'm hearing though from the council is that they would like a little bit more explanation into the recommendation when it comes before them on how they selected the person that are chosen. Okay. Great. I want to be a teacher. I just decided. So, you guys have noticed these last several months and leading up to the end of the year, we have some great things that we are this close to getting done with the city. And part of that was the transportation system plan. The other part is the parks master plan. And then, because you have such a wonderful public works director, he's even created construction design and standards for your nighttime reading to take home.
I come with gifts.
And you know, you have the right public works director when he is excited about what he's giving you. And Gladstone doesn't have a lot of structurized standards, and so what Jim is going to be giving you is the start of what he hopes will be a living document that will continually be improved. So he's going to pass out cookies.
I want to sweeten you up first.
Yeah.
I was just gonna be a green room for our applicants with
Cookies. So while he's passing those out, Tammy Bannock, because we're all a team here, would like to meet you guys next week at 5:30. So she needs to know how many will be here. So if you could raise your hand.
Okay, hold tight while I write down who's all. Tracy,
Planning commission's here, right?
I can't be here.
okay.
Yes. So this will be next Tuesday at 5 o'clock, 5:30, sorry. And
Just confirming, Counselor Reisner, you are?
Yeah, sorry, I think you got me.
Counselor Neese? And she will be here? Did she have her hand up? I did not see. Okay. Commissioner Rowlett, no? Malachi? Libby, yes. And Mr. Smith was no.
so just to clarify real quick what Jim said, these cost $50 a piece to produce, but you are our governing bodies and we needed you to have these documents, so we don't have any for citizens at this time.
The draft Parks Master Plan is on our new website, so you're welcome to go in there and look at it. I wouldn't have felt comfortable saying, okay guys, it's on the website, read it, so we got you. And just give you a little bit of background on this, this has been a year in the making. It's gone through lots of committees, lots of open houses. The Parks Board provided comments, and this is out of that. So their comments are incorporated in this, and now we're going to look for your guys' comments. And our goal is to take those comments at the work session next week, answer questions, we'll have our consultant on board, and then come back to the council on September 12th to get it adopted. And the Parks Board is going to be real happy and excited because they're looking to get some grants and do some stuff.
So that's the Parks Master Plan.
Now, this is what I'm really excited about. Since I got here, I've been, like I said, I should hold it up right. So I have a copy of this for all you guys. This is a draft. This is our Public Works Design and Construction Standards. The first the city's ever had. So basically, what this is for Public Works to make sure that your guys' infrastructure gets installed correctly. This is not a lot of philosophical stuff. That's what the Chapter 17 is about. This is what kind of meter boxes you put in, what kind of curb stops, what kind of curves, what kind of sidewalk, how thick. It's really, it's kind of that type of stuff. But there are a lot of references to Chapter 17, And like Jackie said, this is a living document. This thing, we will change it every time something changes in the Chapter 17. We'll change it when the materials change in the field. The guys start noticing something doesn't work right, we're going to change it. This is a living document. Right now, development comes into town and we go, please do it right. No, please spend the extra money and do it right. So come on, please. So this is going to give Public Works the hammer to make sure it gets done right. So I have a copy for all you guys to look at, and I'm looking forward to...
And that's on the website also?
Thank you.
This is not on the website, not yet, no.
Right, and so we're gonna, give you till September 12th, and we're gonna try to adopt the first copy, and then that's when it's gonna be available.
Well, like I said, this is a living document. Even after this thing's adopted, we will make the changes if you notice something.
Yeah. That's why we're feeding you, and, you know, I just want to say, you guys have a great Public Works Director. This is huge for Gladstone. So we will have tables and chairs set up next week for you to have space. The reason we didn't do it tonight is because now planning commission has to go up and finish their meeting. But thank you guys again. What you do for us is amazing, and we need you. And we're, like I said, we're so close to finishing so many great projects. So, City Council can adjourn.